As we all know, the longest a boxing match can go nowadays is 12 rounds. 36 minutes of constant action is already too much for the average person. Before the limit became 12 rounds, it used to be 15. But because of several deaths that occurred in the final 3 rounds of 15-round fights, they had to change it eventually. A decision that was mainly inspired by the death of Duk Koo Kim at the hands of Ray Mancini. But before that, boxing matches had a very variable amount of rounds. The last fight to go over 15 rounds was in 1941, when Joe Louis faced Abe Simon in a 20-round fight. Before that, the limit was usually 45, the last case being Jack Johnson versus Jess Willard in 1915, and before that, fights could sometimes go for an unlimited amount of time, until one fighter gives up or gets knocked out. The worst case of this would be the time that Andy Bowen faced Texas Jack Burke in 1893, a fight that went on for 110 rounds. The fight lasted for 7 hours and 19 minutes, starting at 9:15 p.m. in the evening, ending at 4:34 a.m. in the morning. The fight took place in New Orleans on a Thursday, and Andy Bowen was the favourite going into the fight, with a record of 14 wins and 3 losses, but for the most part was seen as quite an even fight. The longest Andy Bowen had gone in a fight was 48 rounds versus Austin Gibbons, whereas Burke had gone 43. So the fight begins unassumingly, neither fighter knowing just how long they'd be in the ring for. At this point, boxers would wear 2-ounce skin-tight gloves with no padding at all. The fight being in 1893, there's no footage at all of the fight, but according to reports it was actually good action for the first 30 rounds of the fight. The first fighter to hit the ground was Andy Bowen at some point in the fight. It's not recorded which round it actually was, but it was some point in the first 30. Burke would also hit the canvas at some point in the first 30 rounds. So they've both exchanged knockdowns, and it's quite an even fight. There was a crowd of 11,000 people spectating the fight at the time. Spectators would have had to pay $1 in admission for the fight, and according to reports they were enjoying the spectacle for the first 30 rounds. However, by approximately the 30-round point, inevitably both fighters had really slowed down. The fight was fought at a much more uninteresting pace, and the fans became more and more restless. By about the 40th round, which is equivalent to about 2.5 hours of action, some fans had started to fall asleep in their seats or leave the venue. There was, however, a sudden burst in action. In round 48, Jack Burke had almost been knocked out, apparently being held up by the ropes. But regardless, 3 hours into the fight, Burke fought on. By this point, spectators noticed that Burke's forearms had swelled up to apparently 2 times their size, supposedly from blocking so many punches, and because of how thin the gloves are. He was basically being hit by leather. Both of Burke's hands had broken at this point, and some say that even a bone was protruding from Burke's hand. But ridiculously, he fought on. There was a break in the action at the round 70 point, where the fighters were given a decision. They were given the chance to proclaim the fight as a draw. The fight would end and both fighters got a 50-50 split of the purse, but the fighters refused and fought on. Spectators say that at this point, Andy Bowen was given cocaine in between rounds, in order to maintain his energy. The fight was at a bit of a stalemate at this point. Because of Burke's hand injuries, he was reluctant to throw any punches, so he tried his best throughout the fight to slip and avoid punches as much as he can, hoping maybe Bowen would slow down or give up. By round 93, they even brought in a new referee, the old one apparently being too fatigued after standing for 5 straight hours, but again, neither fighter was too fatigued to continue. By round 105, Andy Bowen fell over, throwing a punch with too much force and finding himself on the floor. It was so much effort at this point to even stand himself up, but 105 rounds was still not enough, as the two continued. By the end of round 110, neither fighter had anything left to give, and since the fights had no end in sight, the officials mercifully ended the fight. And this is the actual result. The only photo of the fight, a colour restored image of what it looks like when 2 men fight for 110 rounds or 7.5 hours. The fight was declared a draw, both men riddled with cuts, bruises and broken bones. Andy Bowen seemed upset about the fight being a draw, thinking he did enough damage to win the fight, which is probably true according to descriptions. Jack Burke did not have that kind of energy, supposedly standing there silently after the fight was called off. Burke was the most injured between the two, suffering 2 broken hands, swollen forearms, a swollen stomach, puffy eyes and ears, massive welts across his sides and his back. They were both carried out of the venue, Burke especially being bedridden for weeks afterwards. Jack Burke was able to retire a few years later. Andy Bowen, more tragically, continued boxing and was killed at the hands of George Loving as the canvas was not set down correctly. That sort of thing explains why boxing was so dangerous at this point, and the fact that Burke was allowed to fight with 2 broken hands, which happened before the second half of the fight even began, shows how far boxing has come in protecting their fighters. That's going to do it for the video. Like and subscribe, leave a comment. Goodbye.